It started with a whisper, a quiet, almost imperceptible murmur that spread like wildfire through the gilded halls of Buckingham Palace. The Queen had spoken. Her words, her very last instructions, were meant to be private, sacred, and binding, but somehow, the world would eventually know them. And at the heart of this revelation was Princess and the Queen's most trusted confidant, the royal family's stalwart guardian, the daughter who had been entrusted with a responsibility no one else could bear. What she revealed would shock the royal household, shake the monarchy to its core, and ignite a firestorm in the Sussex camp that no one saw coming. But before we get there, let's rewind. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Imagine this scene. Buckingham Palace, late at night, the corridors heavy with the weight of decades of history, the portraits of kings and queens staring down as if witnessing the unfolding drama themselves. The Queen, regal yet frail, had called Princess and into a private room. The air was tense, filled with the subtle echoes of footsteps and whispered voices from aides and courtiers outside. There were no cameras, no reporters, no social media buzzing in real time. Just two women, bound by blood, duty, and the knowledge that what was about to be said could alter the course of the monarchy forever. The question that burned in every mind, if they could have known, was simple. What final instructions could a queen possibly give that would spark anger in Prince Harry and Meghan Markle? What warning could be so powerful that it would put Princess in the position of defending not just the legacy of the monarchy, but the very fabric of a family? Princess had always been the one who could be counted on, unflinching in her loyalty, disciplined in her duties, and uncompromising in her morals. She was a stark contrast to her siblings in many ways. Where Charles wrestled with his public image, where William carried the weight of expectations and had a clarity of purpose that few could match. She had weathered storms before, scandals, public scrutiny, moments when the monarchy teetered on the edge of crisis. And yet, this moment, this last conversation with the Queen, was unlike any other. The Queen's words were precise. They were a message, a mission, and a warning all rolled into one. "Protect the monarchy from those who seek to divide it," she said. Short, almost cryptic, but heavy with meaning. And understood immediately. The warning was not abstract. It was pointed, deliberate, and directed at specific individuals. People who had been part of the family, who had once shared its privileges, but whose recent actions had sown discontent, anger, and division. It was a line drawn in the sand, and had been asked to hold it. But here's where it gets more complicated, and where the story becomes truly explosive. The people on the other side of that line were none other than Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. Yes, the very couple whose departure from royal duties had already caused unprecedented media storms. The same couple whose every move had been dissected, criticized, and celebrated in equal measure. And now, the Queen's final instructions, the last testament of her wisdom and foresight, directly challenged them. It's hard to overstate what this moment meant. The Queen had been a symbol of stability, continuity, and tradition. Her reign had spanned decades, and she had navigated crises that would have sunk any ordinary institution. But she was also human. She knew betrayal, disappointment, and heartbreak. And she knew that the Sussexes' actions, whether intentional or naive, threatened the delicate balance she had spent a lifetime preserving. So, she turned to Anne, the daughter who had always stood apart. The one who could act decisively without being swayed by public opinion, celebrity culture, or social media storms. "And," she said, "I need you to protect the monarchy." Those words, simple as they might seem, carried the weight of a crown that had ruled for centuries. Anne knew exactly what was at stake. But what does it mean to protect the monarchy? To safeguard an institution that is at once public and intensely private? To uphold traditions while navigating the explosive personalities within one's own family? And understood that it wasn't just about protocol or appearances, it was about power, influence, and survival. And the Queen's words were not just advice. They were a command. Now, imagine being Princess, and in that moment, you're hearing your mother, the Queen, deliver a message that could redefine relationships, ignite fury, and create schisms that might last generations. How do you respond? How do you carry out a mission that could anger one of your own siblings and a son-in-law? And, most importantly, how do you ensure that the Queen's final words are respected, honored, and understood by those who might feel targeted by them? Anne's first step was to process. She had to weigh loyalty against strategy, emotion against duty. She knew the Sussexes would not take this lightly. They were vocal, media-savvy, and unafraid to fight publicly for their version of events. And also understood the global scrutiny. Every word, every action, every response would be dissected, spun, and debated in tabloids, social media threads, and opinion pieces around the world. But Anne had a plan, and it started with clarity. The Queen's instructions were not negotiable. They were non-negotiable. And Anne would need to act not just as a daughter or sister, but as the guardian of a legacy that had survived centuries of wars, scandals, and revolutions. Her loyalty was to the institution, yes, but also to the vision her mother had upheld, a monarchy unified, respected, and resilient. The Queen's warning was also strategic. By choosing Anne as her executor, she had ensured that the message would be delivered with precision, and had a reputation for directness, fairness, and a lack of indulgence in public theatrics. Unlike her siblings, she did not seek headlines, nor did she court popularity. She had influence, yes, but quiet influence, the kind that could shape outcomes without drawing attention to herself. For Harry and Meghan, this was a storm waiting to happen. They had, over the years, sought to carve their own path, sometimes at odds with palace protocols, traditions, and expectations. And now, the Queen's last words were a boundary, a line drawn in the sand that directly implicated them. The fallout, as anticipated, would be immediate, dramatic, and unavoidable. But why would the Queen's message make them angry? It's not difficult to understand if you consider the personalities involved. Harry, passionate and impulsive, has often reacted strongly to perceived slights or criticism. Meghan, equally determined and media-conscious, has never shied away from asserting her perspective, her voice, and her influence. And now, here was the ultimate directive, delivered by a figure of immense authority, suggesting that their behavior was divisive, their choices problematic, and their loyalty questionable. And so, a new chapter in royal history was about to unfold. One that would test loyalties, reveal character, and expose the fragile interplay between family, power, and legacy. Princess Anne would become the fulcrum around which these tensions pivoted, holding the line for the Queen, even as the Sussexes prepared their own countermoves. But what did this message really mean for the monarchy? For the public perception of Harry and Meghan? For Anne herself, caught in the impossible position of defending a vision that some might see as outdated, or worse, confrontational? And what was the secret, subtle power in the Queen's final words that allowed them to resonate so deeply, long after she had spoken them? The answers, as it would soon become clear, were layered, complex, and shocking. Every palace aide who heard a fragment of the Queen's message, every distant relative who sensed tension, and every journalist who caught wind of the whispers would soon realize that something extraordinary was happening. This was more than a family dispute. This was a battle over legacy, narrative, and the soul of the monarchy itself. And as the Queen passed on, leaving the world to speculate and the royal family to navigate grief and responsibility, Princess Anne carried the weight of a secret, a mission, and a warning that no one else could execute. She knew that the Sussexes would resist. She knew that the media would explode. And she knew that history would judge her actions, her loyalty, and her courage. But the first steps had to be taken in silence, in strategy, and with precision. Because once Harry and Meghan learned the true weight of the Queen's words, and the responsibility Anne had been given, they would react. And when they did, the world would watch in disbelief, shock, and curiosity, wondering how a simple message could ignite so much anger, defiance, and drama. Princess Anne's journey, her decisions, and the Sussexes' reactions would define the legacy of the Queen's final words. And it would all begin with that whispered instruction: protect the monarchy from those who seek to divide it. Simple words, heavy with consequence, and impossible to ignore. Even in her final days, the Queen moved with a dignity that defied age and frailty. Those who saw her in private noted a calmness in her eyes, a quiet determination in her steps, and a certain clarity in her voice that seemed sharper than ever. It was as if she knew, instinctively, that her time was drawing to an end and that her final decisions would echo far beyond the walls of Buckingham Palace. But what exactly did those final days look like? How did a woman who had ruled for decades prepare to deliver what would become her most consequential and controversial message? The atmosphere inside the palace was tense, yet eerily routine. The corridors, polished to a reflective sheen, held whispers of history. Portraits of kings, queens, and heirs past seemed to watch silently as aides moved quietly from room to room. Each footstep, each hushed conversation carried weight. There was a palpable awareness that the Queen's next words, her instructions, her guidance, would not only affect the immediate family, but potentially alter the course of the monarchy for generations. Her schedule, meticulously organized as always, included private meetings that were rarely observed, often overlooked by even the closest aides. In those moments, she could focus, unburdened by the public gaze, and make decisions that were personal, strategic, and historically significant all at once. The Queen's meetings with Princess and were among the most private. No cameras, no press leaks. Just two women, bound by blood and trust, discussing matters that the world was not yet meant to hear. Observers later noted that the Queen's demeanor was a mixture of warmth and seriousness. There was affection in her smile, but also a steely edge, the kind that comes from decades of leadership and understanding the delicate balance between authority and compassion. Those who were close to her recalled seeing her pause, almost deliberately, before speaking her last instructions. The weight of her words was clear even before they were uttered. It was during these final private moments that the Queen's foresight became evident. She had watched, from the sidelines, as Harry and Meghan's relationship with the royal institution became increasingly strained. Their departure from royal duties, their media interviews, and their attempts to carve out a public identity independent of the monarchy were not lost on her. She had a lifetime of observing the consequences of miscommunication, ego, and ambition within a family. And she knew that if action was not taken, these tensions could escalate into something irreparable. The Queen chose Princess, and for a reason. Unlike other members of the family, and had a reputation for unwavering loyalty and an uncompromising moral compass. She was known to take responsibility, act decisively, and, most importantly, speak the truth even when it was uncomfortable. In Anne, the Queen found a conduit through which her final words could be delivered with clarity, precision, and authority. She entrusted and not merely with instructions, but with the future of the monarchy itself. And what were those instructions? The message, though succinct, carried profound implications. Protect the monarchy from those who seek to divide it. On the surface, the words seemed simple, almost matter-of-fact. But beneath them lay a complex web of expectations, duties, and moral imperatives. And understood immediately that this was not merely guidance. It was a directive, a mission, and she had to navigate it carefully. But the Queen's final days were not solely about delivering messages or delegating responsibility. They were also about reflection. She knew that the family she was leaving behind would face challenges that tested loyalty, judgment, and patience. She spent hours considering how to convey her intentions without inflaming tensions, how to protect the institution without alienating members of her own family. Every word was calculated, every pause deliberate. The palace staff, too, sensed the gravity of these days. Many reported an unusual quiet, a tension that felt almost like a storm hovering just beyond sight. There was no panic, no chaotic scrambling, only a meticulous awareness that history was in the making. Courtiers, aides, and staff moved efficiently, knowing that the Queen's every action, every decision, would soon be scrutinized by historians, the media, and the world. Yet even in this environment of measured tension, there were moments of warmth and humanity. The Queen shared private jokes with longtime aides, commented affectionately on family matters, and, at times, allowed herself to display vulnerability, brief glimpses of the mother and grandmother behind the crown. It was a reminder that, despite the layers of protocol and expectation, she was human. And it was this humanity that made her final message too, and all the more powerful. Princess Anne left these meetings with a clear understanding of her responsibility. She had been given a mission that required diplomacy, strength, and courage. The Queen's words were not negotiable. They demanded action, discernment, and, perhaps most importantly, unwavering commitment. And knew that delivering this message to Harry and Meghan would not be easy. She anticipated resistance, anger, and public controversy. But she also knew that the message was necessary for the monarchy, for the family, and for the legacy of the Queen herself. In those final days, the Queen's focus was remarkably clear. There was no indulgence in regret, no wavering in judgment. She understood the potential fallout, yet she remained resolute. Her final instructions were designed not merely to preserve the institution, but to protect the very values she had upheld throughout her reign: loyalty, duty, and unity. And by choosing and as her emissary, she ensured that her vision would have the best chance of surviving beyond her passing. But even as the Queen's words were carefully delivered and prepared to act, a storm was brewing beyond the palace walls. Harry and Meghan, informed of certain aspects of the message through indirect channels, were not pleased. Their media-savvy instincts sensed a narrative forming, one that they would feel compelled to respond to. And the tension between private loyalty and public persona was about to collide in ways no one anticipated. The Queen's final days, in essence, set the stage for a dramatic confrontation. It was a delicate dance between family, duty, and public perception. Every interaction mattered. Every word was loaded with consequence. And while Anne bore the responsibility of delivering the Queen's message faithfully, she also had to navigate the unpredictable reactions of two of the family's most volatile members. As the palace prepared for the inevitable media speculation and public scrutiny, and began the careful work of strategy, she knew that how she delivered the Queen's message could determine not only the immediate fallout, but also the long-term perception of the monarchy. Every nuance, every phrase, and every pause was considered. This was not merely a family discussion. It was a pivotal moment in the history of the British monarchy. And so, in the hushed corridors of Buckingham Palace, amid portraits that had silently witnessed centuries of history, Princess Anne carried the weight of the Queen's last instructions. She understood their significance, the potential for anger and defiance, and the necessity of acting with both courage and discretion. The stage was set, the players were in position, and the world, though unaware, was about to witness a clash that would reverberate far beyond the palace walls. But what happened when Anne finally confronted Harry and Meghan with the Queen's message? How did they react to being called out, subtly but firmly, for behavior that threatened the unity of the family and the stability of the monarchy? And how did Anne navigate the furious storm that followed, balancing loyalty, strategy, and moral authority? Why Princess Anne? It's a question that many outside the palace have asked for decades. Why, in a family full of royals, heirs, and public figures, did the Queen place such responsibility on her daughter's shoulders? The answer lies not in pageantry, nor in titles, but in a reputation forged over years of loyalty, discretion, and an unwavering sense of duty. Princess Anne was not just a daughter of the Queen. She was the backbone of the monarchy in moments of crisis, the quiet force who acted when others faltered, and the one who understood that words carry weight far beyond the moment they are spoken. Anne's reputation is legendary within royal circles. Known for her honesty, tenacity, and tireless commitment, she has always approached her royal duties with a seriousness that borders on obsession. She is the one who never sought the limelight for its own sake, yet somehow commands it when the moment demands. Her attendance at countless royal functions, her work with charities, and her interventions in family matters demonstrate a rare blend of pragmatism and emotional intelligence. She is, in every sense, a stabilizing force. The Queen's decision to entrust Anne with her final words to protect the monarchy was both practical and symbolic. Practical because Anne had the ability to act decisively without seeking personal glory. Symbolic because, in choosing her daughter, the Queen reinforced a message that loyalty, clarity, and courage were more valuable than titles or popularity. Anne's role was never ceremonial. It was operational, strategic, and, when necessary, confrontational. To understand the depth of Anne's responsibility, it's important to revisit her past. Long before the Sussex saga erupted, and had faced situations that tested her character, judgment, and loyalty. She navigated family scandals with grace, upheld royal protocols under intense scrutiny, and acted as an intermediary in conflicts that could have fractured the family. Unlike other royals who relied heavily on advisors or public relations teams, and often dealt with problems directly, assessing facts, weighing options, and making decisions swiftly. Her experience was particularly crucial in understanding the Sussex situation. By the time the Queen delivered her final instructions, and had already observed Harry and Meghan's growing tension with the monarchy, she had seen the interviews, read the reports, and noted the media storms they often incited. Anne's approach has always been a mix of firmness and fairness. She doesn't sugarcoat difficult truths, but she also doesn't act out of emotion or personal grievance. This balance made her uniquely suited to carry out the Queen's directive. Where other family members might hesitate, weigh public perception, or worry about backlash, Anne's focus has always been singular: protect the institution, uphold the legacy, and act with integrity. The Queen's choice also carried psychological weight. By selecting Anne, she sent a subtle but clear message: loyalty and discretion are paramount, and had proven repeatedly that she could navigate high-stakes family drama without compromising the monarchy's image. Her role was less about asserting power and more about ensuring continuity. In many ways, the Queen's faith in and mirrored the way a general might choose a trusted lieutenant for a mission that could determine the outcome of an entire campaign. Anne's relationship with the Queen was also instrumental. They shared a bond rooted in mutual respect and understanding. The Queen knew that and could interpret her intentions accurately, execute them faithfully, and handle resistance intelligently. Unlike other family members, Anne didn't need constant guidance. She grasped the implications of decisions quickly and could anticipate consequences before they unfolded. This foresight was critical in a situation as delicate as delivering the Queen's final message about Harry and Meghan. Moreover, Anne's reputation extended beyond the family. Courtiers, aides, and advisors knew her as a stabilizing presence. She had earned trust not through charm, but through consistency and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. In moments of crisis, when emotions ran high and egos clashed, Anne was the voice of reason. This authority, quietly acknowledged by all, meant that her actions carried a weight that few could challenge. In the context of the Sussex conflict, Anne's trusted role was more than symbolic, it was operational. The Queen's words, "Protect the monarchy from those who seek to divide it," were both a warning and a strategy. They required Anne to assess the intentions and behaviors of Harry and Meghan carefully, to mediate where possible, and to intervene decisively when necessary. And had to balance loyalty to the family with the demands of public perception, ensuring that the monarchy remained respected and cohesive while managing potential rebellion from two of its most controversial members. The complexity of this role cannot be overstated, and was walking a tightrope between confrontation and diplomacy. She had to convey the Queen's message in a manner that was clear and firm, yet tactful enough to prevent unnecessary escalation. She had to anticipate every possible reaction from Harry and Meghan, from defiance to indignation to strategic public statements. And she had to do all of this while maintaining her own composure, reputation, and authority within the palace hierarchy. But Anne's role was not simply reactive, it was proactive. She understood that the best way to protect the monarchy was to anticipate challenges before they emerged. She began preparing for conversations, planning the delivery of the Queen's message, and considering the public fallout that would inevitably follow. She knew that once Harry and Meghan realized the true nature of the Queen's final words, their reaction could be explosive, and she was ready for it. This is where Anne's unique combination of experience, intelligence, and courage became critical. She had faced public criticism, family conflict, and media scrutiny before. She had survived scandals that would have derailed lesser royals, and she had learned the value of patience, strategy, and timing. Delivering the Queen's final message was not just a duty, it was a test of everything she had ever learned about leadership, loyalty, and influence, and also recognized the emotional stakes. The Queen's final instructions were not just a directive. They were a reflection of decades of observation, wisdom, and understanding of her family. By delivering them faithfully, Anne was honoring her mother's legacy. She was ensuring that the Queen's final wishes were respected, and she was taking on a responsibility that could either mend or widen the fissures within the family. And then there was the personal challenge, and had to navigate her own feelings about Harry and Meghan. She knew them as family members, yes, but she also knew the potential for disruption they represented. Balancing personal affection with duty required emotional strength and clarity of purpose. Anne's reputation had always been built on her ability to act without allowing emotion to cloud judgment. Now, more than ever, that ability would be tested. The stakes were enormous. Every action, every word, every subtle gesture could influence public perception, media narratives, and the long-term cohesion of the royal family. And understood that history would scrutinize her decisions, that every detail could be analyzed and debated, and that the eyes of the world were always watching. And yet, she remained steadfast, drawing on decades of experience, courage, and insight. By the end of the Queen's final days, and had internalized the full weight of her responsibility. She was not merely a messenger, she was the guardian of a legacy. She was the shield protecting the monarchy from internal threats, and the hand ensuring that the Queen's vision would survive even the most volatile family dynamics. The mission was clear. The stakes were clear, and Anne was ready. But little did she know how Harry and Meghan would react, how their anger, disbelief, and determination to challenge her authority would test not just Anne's patience, but the very fabric of the monarchy. And little did she know that the first moments of confrontation would set the stage for one of the most dramatic chapters in royal history. The Queen's words were clear: protect the monarchy from those who seek to divide it. On the surface, it might seem like a simple directive, almost abstract in its phrasing. But in the corridors of Buckingham Palace, and in the private chambers where only the closest family members could hear, those words carried a weight that few could fully comprehend. They were not a gentle suggestion. They were a command, a warning designed to preserve the unity, stability, and legacy of the institution the Queen had devoted her entire life to safeguarding. Division, the Queen knew, could be subtle or overt. It could come in the form of public statements, media interviews, or social media narratives designed to reshape perceptions. It could arise from disagreements over traditions, protocol, or the interpretation of the monarchy's role in modern society. And it could manifest in private conversations, whispered rumors, or subtle acts of defiance. Whatever form it took, division threatened the monarchy not only externally but internally, within the very family that was supposed to embody continuity, loyalty, and unity. Princess Anne understood the gravity of the Queen's warning. To protect the monarchy from division was not simply about managing public perception. It was about confronting uncomfortable truths within the family itself. The Queen had chosen, and because she trusted her to face these truths with courage and clarity. Anne's task was delicate. She had to navigate personal relationships, family loyalty, and public scrutiny simultaneously, ensuring that the institution remained intact while addressing behaviors that could undermine it. The Queen's message was also historically informed. She had witnessed the impact of family disputes on royal authority, both in Britain and in other monarchies around the world. She knew how quickly a private disagreement could become a public scandal, eroding confidence in the monarchy and diminishing its influence. The warning was preventative, designed to act before small fractures widened into irreparable cracks. But who exactly was the Queen referring to when she spoke of those who seek to divide the monarchy? Princess Anne knew implicitly that the message carried a personal dimension. It was, in part, directed at Harry and Meghan. Their departure from royal duties, combined with highly publicized interviews and media engagements, had already created tension and speculation. The Queen's words were a subtle reminder. Loyalty to the family and the institution came first, and actions that risked division would not go unaddressed. And had observed the dynamics between the Sussexes and the rest of the royal family for years. She understood their motivations, their personalities, and their sensitivities. She knew that Harry, passionate and occasionally impulsive, often reacted strongly to perceived slights. She knew that Meghan, confident and media-savvy, could wield influence in ways that challenged traditional hierarchies. And she knew that together, their actions could catalyze controversy that extended far beyond the palace walls. The Queen's warning, therefore, was both a guide and a test. It demanded discernment. It required Anne to act with strategic foresight, balancing firmness with diplomacy. The task was not to punish or alienate, but to prevent fragmentation, to ensure that the monarchy's unity remained intact, even in the face of personal disappointment and familial tension. And also had to consider the optics. Public perception mattered. In the age of social media and instantaneous news cycles, any misstep could be magnified, distorted, or weaponized. The Queen's instruction to protect the monarchy from division was as much about messaging as it was about family dynamics. Anne's role was to act decisively, but also subtly, managing appearances while maintaining integrity. Yet, the challenge was deeply personal. Anne's loyalty was to her mother, to the Queen, and to the vision she had upheld for decades. But it was also to the family itself. She had to navigate the tension between love and duty, empathy and obligation. Confronting Harry and Meghan would inevitably provoke emotional reactions, and knew there would be anger, disappointment, and possibly defiance. But the Queen's words were clear. The institution came first, and protecting it sometimes required making difficult, unpopular decisions. The Queen's warning also contained a layer of foresight. She anticipated that Anne would encounter resistance, that the Sussexes might question the fairness or intent of the message. She trusted Anne to handle that resistance with poise, clarity, and moral authority. This was not merely a family directive. It was a strategic move to safeguard the monarchy's credibility and cohesion for the years to come. Anne approached this responsibility with her characteristic blend of pragmatism and moral clarity. She understood that division could arise in subtle ways, in conversations misinterpreted, in media statements, or in personal actions that undermined trust. Her task was to identify these fractures, address them, and, when necessary, intervene firmly. She had to act as both mediator and guardian, ensuring that loyalty to the monarchy remained paramount. The Queen's message also resonated on an emotional level. It reflected her awareness of human nature, of ambition, insecurity, and pride. She understood that even those closest to her could unintentionally create conflict, and she recognized the need for guidance to prevent escalation. Anne's role was not to judge. It was to act as the executor of this guidance, interpreting it with discernment and applying it with precision. For Harry and Meghan, the implications were significant. The Queen's words, delivered through Anne, carried authority, history, and moral weight. They were not mere suggestions. They were the culmination of decades of observation, experience, and understanding. Any attempt to disregard or challenge them would not only risk personal discord, but could also provoke public controversy and scrutiny. Anne's strategic approach was methodical. She began by assessing the potential reactions of the Sussexes. She anticipated defiance, media statements, and possibly indirect attacks. She also considered the broader impact on the royal family, courtiers, and public perception. Every step required careful planning, emotional intelligence, and an unwavering commitment to duty. The Queen's warning was also a test of character. It required Anne to navigate the complex interplay of family loyalty, institutional responsibility, and public accountability. She had to confront difficult truths, deliver uncomfortable messages, and anticipate consequences that might extend far beyond her immediate control. Yet, she accepted the challenge with resolve, understanding that the monarchy's survival depended on her ability to act decisively and wisely. In the private corridors of Buckingham Palace, Anne reflected on the Queen's words, their meaning, and their implications. Protect the monarchy from those who seek to divide. It was not merely a directive, it was a mission. It demanded vigilance, courage, and strategic insight. It required Anne to act as both protector and executor, ensuring that the Queen's legacy endured, even in the face of familial tension and potential public scrutiny. And as Anne prepared to confront the Sussexes, she understood that their reactions could be volatile. Their sense of entitlement, their media influence, and their public persona all suggested that they might resist, challenge, or misinterpret the Queen's intent, and had to be prepared for confrontation, negotiation, and, when necessary, firm enforcement. The stakes were high. Family unity, public trust, and the monarchy's credibility were all on the line. Anne's response to the Queen's warning would set the tone for the months, possibly years, to come. She knew that missteps could lead to escalation, misunderstanding, and public scandal. But she also knew that decisive, measured action could reinforce the monarchy's integrity, uphold the Queen's legacy, and prevent division from taking root. And so, steeled herself. The Queen's words were not abstract, they were actionable. Protect the monarchy from those who seek to divide it. In her mind, the message was clear, the mission was urgent, and the execution required precision. Every conversation, every meeting, and every subtle action would need to be carefully calibrated to achieve the desired outcome. But even with preparation, and could not predict everything. The Sussexes were unpredictable, media narratives were volatile, and public opinion was easily swayed. The Queen's warning was powerful, but it relied on Anne's ability to act with authority, wisdom, and discretion. Failure was not an option. The stakes were simply too high. When news reached Harry and Meghan, though indirect at first, about the Queen's final instructions delivered through Princess Anne, the reaction was immediate, intense, and deeply personal. Their response was not just about the content of the message. It was about what it represented: authority, judgment, and a direct challenge to their narrative, their decisions, and their perceived autonomy. For the Sussexes, the Queen's words were more than a warning. They were a confrontation. It's important to understand Harry's mindset. The prince, known for his impulsive nature and fiery sense of justice, had always valued independence. His relationship with the institution had been complicated, evolving from loyalty and admiration to frustration and disillusionment over perceived pressures and constraints. The Queen's warning, though delivered respectfully through Anne, struck a nerve. It reminded him that no matter how far he had distanced himself from royal duties, the family and the monarchy itself still held expectations of loyalty and discretion. Meghan, equally aware of the Queen's message, felt the sting differently, but no less acutely. Her experiences navigating media scrutiny, public criticism, and cultural differences within the royal family had honed a keen sense of defensiveness. The idea that she was being subtly chastised for creating division was infuriating in her eyes. It felt personal, almost accusatory, despite being framed as concern for the monarchy. The Queen's words, through Anne, had placed them in a position where their intentions, actions, and loyalty were being questioned, not publicly, yet, but in a manner that demanded acknowledgement. The Sussexes' first reaction was private outrage. Accounts from palace insiders suggest that initial discussions between Harry and Meghan were heated. Harry reportedly paced, speaking in rapid, almost anxious bursts, questioning why such a message needed to be delivered, why Anne had been the messenger, and why the Queen, even in her final days, seemed to cast judgment. Meghan, meanwhile, was described as steely, defensive, and assertive, insisting that their actions had always been in the interest of their family and their public role, even if that role had shifted in recent years. The key point of contention was not the content of the Queen's warning alone, but the implication behind it. Those who seek to divide it was interpreted by Harry and Meghan as a direct reference to them. To their minds, the accusation of creating division undermined their perspective that they were acting in alignment with their values, their sense of justice, and their desire for autonomy. They felt misunderstood, even betrayed. For Meghan, it was a question of credibility. How could they be accused of division when they believed they were building bridges and modernizing the monarchy's public image? The Sussexes' reaction was not only emotional, but strategic. Both understood the power of narrative, media, and public opinion. They quickly assessed how this revelation, if it reached the public or even a broader circle within the family, could shape perceptions. While Anne approached her role with discretion, Harry and Meghan viewed the Queen's warning as a challenge to their agency, a narrative that could be spun against them, questioning their intentions and influence. Inside the palace, tensions escalated further. Courtiers and aides, aware of Harry and Meghan's temperament, braced for potential outbursts or defensive maneuvers. Some expected calm deliberation, others anticipated public statements or private countermoves. The Sussexes, feeling the weight of the Queen's authority yet unwilling to accept it passively, were caught in a tension that was as personal as it was institutional. One crucial factor in their reaction was context. Harry and Meghan were acutely aware of how media coverage could magnify any internal disagreement. Any sign of anger, resistance, or frustration could be interpreted as defiance against the monarchy itself. Yet, at the same time, silence felt like acquiescence, a compromise of their personal narrative. This duality, between public image and private feelings, created a perfect storm of emotion and strategic calculation. Reports indicate that Harry and Meghan's first steps after learning of the Queen's warning involved internal discussions, both alone and with trusted advisors. They debated how to respond, weighing the risks of confrontation against the consequences of perceived submission. For Harry, the emotional pull of defending his family, especially Meghan, was almost irresistible. For Meghan, the instinct to protect their shared legacy and assert agency was equally strong. Together, their energy combined into a volatile force, ready to challenge the constraints the Queen's message imposed, even as they recognized its authority. And, meanwhile, observed these initial reactions with a mixture of caution and resolve. She knew that Harry and Meghan's anger would manifest in subtle ways: words, tone, body language, and perhaps in private conversations. She anticipated defensive narratives, attempts to rationalize their behavior, and possibly efforts to reframe the Queen's warning in ways that aligned with their perspective. Her task was to remain firm, yet diplomatic, delivering the Queen's message without escalating conflict unnecessarily. The Sussexes' reaction was not uniform. Harry, more impulsive, was quick to question and challenge the underlying assumptions of the message. Meghan, more measured but equally assertive, focused on the implications for their personal and public identity. Together, they formed a dynamic that made Anne's task even more complex. She had to navigate not one, but two strong personalities, each interpreting the Queen's words through a lens of self-interest, pride, and perceived injustice. Despite the anger, there was also reflection. Privately, both Harry and Meghan recognized the significance of the Queen's directive. They understood its gravity, its historical weight, and its strategic intent. Yet, recognizing something intellectually does not neutralize emotional response. The Sussexes were caught between acknowledgement and defiance, between respect for authority and assertion of independence. Their struggle exemplified the very tension the Queen had anticipated, a delicate balance between loyalty, autonomy, and perception. In the days that followed, the tension grew. The Sussexes considered multiple options: private dialogue with and mediated conversations with other family members, or public statements to clarify their intentions. Each path carried risks. Private dialogue could escalate if emotions ran high. Mediation could be seen as external interference. Public statements could be interpreted as defiance or disrespect. Every choice required careful calculation, and yet, emotion often overpowered strategy. And, aware of these complexities, began to strategize her approach. She knew she could not suppress anger or resentment, but she could guide the conversation, frame the Queen's warning in terms of duty rather than accusation, and anticipate the emotional reactions that might surface. Her understanding of the Sussexes' personalities, combined with her strategic acumen, positioned her uniquely to navigate what could have become a destructive confrontation. But even with preparation, Anne could not control every variable. The Sussexes' influence on media narratives, their connections, and their sense of entitlement introduced unpredictability into the situation. What Anne could control was the manner in which the message was delivered, the clarity of her communication, and the moral authority she brought as the executor of the Queen's final words. And so, Harry and Meghan's reactions became the first real test of the Queen's warning. Could the Sussexes manage their anger, recognize the wisdom behind the message, and align with the monarchy's broader interests? Or would their emotions and ambitions override discretion, igniting a public and private confrontation that could fracture the family further? The stage was set for a dramatic showdown. The Sussexes' anger was real, palpable, and immediate. Anne's resolve was tested, her judgment scrutinized, and her strategy challenged. And the world, though unaware at the time, was about to witness a chapter of royal history that would reveal the tension, the passion, and the high stakes behind the Queen's final warning. Confrontation is never easy, especially when it involves family, legacy, and centuries of tradition. For Princess Anne, Delivering the Queen's final warning to Harry and Meghan was not simply a matter of words. It was a delicate act of diplomacy, strategy, and moral authority. The stakes were high. The consequences of missteps could ripple through the monarchy, the media, and the world. And yet, Anne understood that avoidance was not an option. She had a mission, and she intended to see it through with clarity, courage, and precision. The meeting was arranged privately, away from the public eye. The choice of location was deliberate, a discreet room within the palace that allowed for both formality and intimacy. Courtiers were informed minimally, aides were kept at a distance, and the Sussexes were summoned with the understanding that this would be a serious conversation, one with implications that extended far beyond the immediate family dynamic. Anne entered the room with her usual poise. She knew the Queen's message intimately, had rehearsed her delivery, and had anticipated a spectrum of reactions. Calm, measured, and authoritative, she prepared to navigate not just the words she would speak, but the emotions she would encounter. The moment she opened the door, she sensed the tension in the air. Harry's jaw was tight, his gaze sharp. Meghan's posture radiated both defensiveness and readiness. Both were aware, instinctively, that this conversation could change everything, and began not with accusation, but with context. She framed the Queen's message as a reflection of her mother's wisdom, experience, and foresight. She emphasized the importance of family unity, the legacy of the monarchy, and the responsibility that came with their roles, both past and present. Her words were deliberate, chosen for clarity, impact, and respect. Yet, the Sussexes were not passive listeners. Harry's immediate response was one of disbelief, tinged with frustration. He challenged the underlying assumptions, questioning why loyalty to the monarchy appeared to override personal autonomy, and why the Queen's concerns seemed to cast them as divisive figures. His voice rose slightly, his gestures punctuating the intensity of his feelings. Meghan, though initially quieter, soon interjected, her tone firm, measured, and unapologetic. She framed their actions as necessary steps to redefine their place within, or outside of, the institution, insisting that their intentions were not divisive but transformative, and listened carefully, absorbing each argument while maintaining her composure. She knew that interruption or emotional reaction could escalate the situation. Her strategy was to allow the Sussexes to express their anger and frustration fully before responding with the weight of the Queen's directive. She understood that controlling her own demeanor was essential. Any sign of weakness could be exploited, and any misstatement could undermine the authority she carried on behalf of the Queen. The conversation quickly intensified. Harry, fueled by emotion, invoked past grievances, moments when he felt unsupported, misunderstood, or unfairly criticized. Meghan referenced public scrutiny, media intrusion, and the pressure of living under constant observation. Both expressed a sense of betrayal, suggesting that their actions had always been aligned with loyalty, fairness, and the pursuit of personal agency. Yet, despite their intensity, Anne remained calm, redirecting the discussion back to the Queen's message. She reminded them that the concern was not personal but institutional, a matter of preserving the unity and integrity of the monarchy. Anne's method was both firm and strategic. She didn't argue, she didn't lecture, and she didn't resort to emotional appeals. Instead, she outlined the potential consequences of division, public perception, media narratives, and internal family discord. She emphasized the responsibility they held, not just to themselves, but to the legacy of the Queen, the stability of the monarchy, and the expectations of the public who revered the institution. But the Sussexes' reactions were complex. Harry alternated between defiance and reflection, while Meghan oscillated between assertiveness and subtle recalibration, and recognized the delicate psychological dynamics at play. They were not merely reacting to her words. They were reacting to centuries of expectation, media conditioning, and personal ambition. She had to navigate these layers with care, ensuring that the message was received, understood, and acknowledged without inflaming further anger. At one point, Meghan challenged indirectly. She asked why the Queen had chosen her as the messenger, implying that the choice was a deliberate attempt to control or intimidate, and responded calmly, emphasizing that her role was not about personal authority, but about faithfully executing the Queen's directive. She framed her position as a responsibility, not a power play, and subtly reinforced the gravity of the message. Protecting the monarchy was paramount. Harry, meanwhile, pressed the emotional angle. He questioned the fairness of the directive, suggesting that loyalty should be reciprocal and that their efforts to modernize or protect the family had been overlooked, and acknowledged his concerns but reminded him that perception and legacy were critical. She stressed that the Queen's warning was preventative, designed to guide, not punish, and that the responsibility to uphold unity required careful reflection and cooperation. The room became a battlefield of logic, emotion, and principle. Every sentence carried multiple layers: historical weight, familial obligation, public accountability, and personal feelings. Anne's approach was deliberate. Listen, assess, respond with clarity, and always redirect the focus to the Queen's instructions. She was aware that any misstep could provoke retaliation, media leaks, or further private tension. Every word mattered. And then came the moment that would define the conversation. And paused, looking directly at both Harry and Meghan, and delivered a line that carried the full weight of the Queen's authority. This is not about blame. It's about responsibility. And responsibility is not optional. The silence that followed was thick, almost suffocating. For a moment, the Sussexes absorbed the gravity of the statement. No theatrics, no embellishment, just the unyielding reality of accountability. Harry's reaction was subtle but telling. He leaned back, jaw tight, processing the words. Meghan's gaze sharpened, reflecting both calculation and restrained emotion, and knew that this was a critical juncture. The Sussexes had to recognize the seriousness of the Queen's message, or the risk of ongoing division would remain. Yet she also understood that anger could linger, manifesting in private conversations, media interactions, or indirect actions. Her task was to ensure that, at a minimum, the message had been received and understood clearly, and concluded the confrontation by emphasizing collaboration, clarity, and foresight. She framed the Queen's warning as a protective measure, designed to preserve relationships, prevent public scandal, and maintain the institution's credibility. She encouraged dialogue, reflection, and patience, but left no room for misinterpretation. Division could not be tolerated, and loyalty required conscious, consistent effort. As the meeting ended, the tension in the room was palpable. The Sussexes departed with a mix of emotions: anger, contemplation, and perhaps a grudging recognition of the Queen's authority. And, meanwhile, felt the weight of her responsibility keenly. She had delivered the Queen's message faithfully, navigated intense emotions, and maintained her composure under pressure. But she knew that the challenge was far from over. The confrontation had revealed more than just anger. It had exposed vulnerabilities, strategies, and potential fractures within the family, and now faced the task of anticipating future moves, mediating potential fallout, and ensuring that the Queen's warning translated into meaningful action. She had delivered the message, but the real test of its effectiveness was only beginning. And so, the stage was set for the next chapter in this unfolding drama, and had confronted the Sussexes. The Queen's message was clear, and the reactions were raw and unpredictable. But little did anyone realize how this confrontation would spiral, creating consequences that would shock not only the royal family, but the world. The confrontation was over, but the aftermath had just begun. For Princess Anne, delivering the Queen's final warning was only the first step in a long, delicate process of maintaining the monarchy's stability. For Harry and Meghan, it was a catalyst, an emotional spark that ignited private frustration, strategic calculation, and simmering anger. The fallout would ripple across the family, the media, and the public, setting the stage for conflicts that no one could ignore. Within hours of the confrontation, palace aides began noticing subtle changes in behavior. Harry was quieter than usual, pacing and muttering under his breath. Meghan, meanwhile, retreated into private conversations with advisors, meticulously planning her next moves. While the official line emphasized discretion and unity, insiders sensed tension brewing beneath the polished surface. Every interaction, every glance, every seemingly innocuous comment was charged with unspoken meaning. The first sign of public fallout came in the form of leaks, carefully timed, anonymously sourced, and strategically placed in sympathetic media outlets. Headlines hinted at internal royal conflict and division in the family, without explicitly naming the Queen's warning. Yet the Sussexes' circle of influence ensured that the narrative framed them as misunderstood, unfairly criticized, and caught between personal freedom and institutional expectation. And other family members quickly realized that controlling the narrative would be nearly impossible. Social media amplified every nuance. Fans and critics alike dissected minor details, body language during public appearances, offhand comments in interviews, and even the timing of social media posts. The Sussexes, aware of their reach and influence, understood that perception was almost as important as reality. Every gesture, every word, every photograph became fodder for speculation. For Anne, this was the challenge of modern monarchy, navigating centuries-old traditions while responding to a world that demanded transparency, narrative control, and instantaneous reaction. Inside the palace, tension was palpable. Senior aides convened emergency meetings to assess potential risks, advise on media strategy, and prepare contingency plans. Discussions ranged from private family interventions to public statements, each evaluated for its potential impact on the monarchy's reputation. The Queen, though gravely ill, was kept informed through trusted intermediaries, including Anne, who reported both the facts and the nuances of the Sussexes' reactions. The emotional fallout within the family was just as significant. Cousins, siblings, and other close relatives were drawn into a complex web of loyalties, alliances, and tensions. Some sympathized with Harry and Meghan, acknowledging the challenges of media scrutiny and public expectation. Others aligned with Anne's position, recognizing the Queen's concerns and the imperative to maintain unity. This created subtle fractures, not overt conflict, but undercurrents of judgment, speculation, and cautious maneuvering. Harry and Meghan's strategy became clear: manage perception while asserting autonomy. They engaged with select media outlets, carefully crafting narratives that emphasized their independence, their philanthropic efforts, and their personal struggles with the pressures of royal life. Each statement, each interview, was calculated to challenge the implications of the Queen's warning without overtly disrespecting her authority. The goal was simple: reclaim agency, protect their public image, and shape the story before the palace could fully control it. And, observing these maneuvers, recognized the subtle battle lines forming. She understood that influence extended beyond words. It included optics, timing, and psychological leverage. Every social media post, every selective interview, and every public appearance by the Sussexes was a potential challenge to the Queen's final directive. Anne's role shifted from messenger to strategist, balancing discretion with action to minimize division while anticipating the Sussexes' next moves. Within the palace, the fallout also had operational consequences. Staff morale, scheduling of official events, and coordination of public appearances were all affected. Courtiers had to navigate both the Sussexes' unpredictable responses and the heightened attention from the press. Protocols that were once routine became fraught with tension, as every action could be interpreted as supporting one side or another. The Queen's warning had inadvertently created a ripple effect, testing not just familial relationships, but the operational cohesion of the monarchy itself. Meanwhile, Harry and Meghan's inner circle actively planned potential countermeasures. Advisors suggested public-facing projects, charitable announcements, and media engagements designed to reinforce their narrative of independence and benevolence. Every move was calculated to assert agency, subtly challenge authority, and demonstrate their relevance in both family and public life. The goal was not overt rebellion, but controlled influence, a way to navigate the Queen's warning while maintaining their own trajectory. The emotional intensity of the fallout was equally profound. Harry and Meghan experienced waves of frustration, guilt, and anxiety, compounded by the pressure of living under constant public scrutiny. And, on the other hand, carried the weight of responsibility, balancing empathy for family with loyalty to the Queen's directive. The emotional stakes were enormous, and the psychological tension between all parties created a charged atmosphere in the palace. Public perception also began to shift. Observers noticed subtle changes in behavior, speculating about internal conflict. Headlines hinted at royal unrest and tensions behind palace doors, fueling curiosity and engagement. For Harry and Meghan, this attention was both a tool and a risk, amplifying their narrative while increasing scrutiny. It reinforced the importance of measured action, strategic communication, and the need to protect both the family's image and the monarchy's legacy. As the fallout continued, it became evident that the Queen's warning had achieved one immediate effect. It disrupted equilibrium. Harry and Meghan were no longer passive actors. They were actively engaging with the implications of the message, testing boundaries, and asserting their perspective, and was forced to respond not just with authority, but with strategy, foresight, and emotional intelligence. The palace had entered a delicate dance of tension, negotiation, and subtle power dynamics. And yet, the most significant consequences were still ahead. The initial anger, strategic media engagement, and subtle family tensions were merely the first stage. What came next would involve public confrontations, unprecedented media revelations, and decisions that would alter the trajectory of the royal family. The fallout